Welcome back to the show. And it's interesting, the mutual appreciation and budding bromance between King Charles and Donald Trump, well, it continues to grow. And an idea that was raised during the first Trump presidency is back on the agenda again, that the US might just become an associate member of the Commonwealth. Now, we know there will be a historic second state visit, so let's see how far this bromance actually goes. Joining me now is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, what's the chance of the US becoming involved in the Commonwealth?
Well, this is an interesting one because this idea was actually floated during Donald Trump's first presidency and apparently received approval by the Queen at the time. Now, we know that Donald Trump is a huge fan of the monarchy. However, the way that legislation works in the US means that the president can't just decide everything. It will be quite a historic move, though, because we know that next year will be the 250-year anniversary of the existence of the United States since they declared independence from Britain in 1776. And we know that the President Trump is very fond of the monarchy and King Charles, which has gone a long way in smoothing relations between Britain and US in these turbulent times, particularly because Keir Starmer is basically Donald Trump's polar opposite. And Donald Trump actually said this in a conversation with Piers Morgan. So it will be quite interesting. I mean, the UK hasn't really made much the value of the Commonwealth in terms of its potential. So, I mean, if the US was to join this Association of Commonwealth Countries, you would have a potential market, a free trade market value of about $41 trillion compared to the EU $17 trillion. So that actually really changes the balance of things. The last 5 countries to have joined the Commonwealth have had no historical ties to the British Empire. So it is, growing in a positive direction because it's moving more from a sort of a historical association now to a modern day association of democracies. And it would also strengthen the ties, obviously, between Britain and the US, but also more broadly English-speaking countries like Canada, like Australia, like New Zealand. So actually, economically, the potential for this diplomatic feat of nature, basically, would be quite significant. And I'm sure the EU would not be very happy about it. Now, whether the actual MAGA movement and sort of the more grassroots Republicans would approve of this is a bit different because there is something they're quite fond of the idea of their independence and the US being a very unique country in the way that it was formed. And I'm not sure that many Americans would actually appreciate kind of almost having that historical link with the UK and the Commonwealth codified by them becoming associate members. However, we'll have to wait and see. It is an interesting idea. It would be quite a historic one, and I'm pretty sure Donald Trump is more looking towards his legacy and what that would mean for America's place in the world and Britain as a sort of diplomatic leader in terms of democratic values. But it would be the economic and security implications that would probably be more interesting.
Well, we'll have to see how that one goes, but I think it'll be very interesting. And look, again, this week we've seen some great footage and reporting from Prince William's visit to Estonia this week. What was the purpose of this trip?
So the purpose of this trip was to basically show the UK's basically support of Ukraine and its allies during this war with Russia. Prince William actually visited an army base where the British troops stationed, which is about 80 kilometers from the Russian border. And he did also visit the capital, Estonia, and politicians and leading politicians in the country. And it's just basically to solidify Britain's position in the world when it comes to the Ukraine war and the fact that, Britain is leading this sort of coalition of the willing to have troops stationed, about 30,000 troops stationed on Ukraine's border with Russia once this war wraps up. And it's just kind of to send a message that Europe and Britain more broadly is not going to allow Russia's incursion into Ukraine to ever happen again. And this follows sort of the kind of diplomatic tensions between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump's White House, where the resolution of this war has been quite a bit of a diplomatic crisis. Europe is asking itself, what do we do now? What do we do if Trump decides to play hardball and we're basically left to defend our borders by ourselves? And, to add further into the mix, there's been questions about Europe's lax security when it comes to defending its borders, the fact that it was happy to buy cheap Russian oil and gas to fuel its own industries, while kind of letting go of the security concerns that actually Donald Trump raised at a UN Security Conference back in 2018. So, you know, no one does diplomacy like the royal family, and I can't actually imagine that any other member of the royal family would have been more fitting to conduct this visit than Prince William. And it just goes to show Britain's position on this issue. And it does go a long way to say that actually, with or without the United States, Britain and Europe has a plan.
Indeed. And look, another interesting report this week that's about the goings-on in the House of Lords. Apparently, not all of the royal family would be welcome to join them. Where do they draw the line and why?
So there were sort of suggestions that you could have members of the royal family sitting in the House of Lords, because obviously to sit in the House of Lords, you have to either be a hereditary peer to be made a lord, or to have certain positions like the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, there was a hereditary peer, Lord Northbrook, who made the comments that he would welcome the idea, but he would draw the line at Prince Harry and Prince Andrew. Now, Lord Northbrook's position in and of itself is quite contentious, because he is a hereditary peer. He did inherit his role, and we know that Blair abolished, future hereditary peers from entering the House of Lords. So his own position is quite tenuous in the grand scheme of things. But I do find it amusing that he said he would tolerate the rest, but he can draw the line. He has to draw the line at Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, who, by the way, have no chance of ever sitting the Lords again. Because Prince Andrew is completely disgraced and a headache for the royal family, and two, because Prince Harry is also, I suspect, in his own way disgraced, and obviously doesn't live here and doesn't have any ties to working royal life.
Now, more this week on the King and Queen's visit to the Holy See in April. What's the update?
Yes, so the King and Queen are going to visit the St. Paul Basilica on the 7th of April next month. Now, this is, for all the history buffs, this is quite a historic moment, because it's the first time that, the head of the Church of England and a monarch is actually visiting the papacy after, basically the split between the Church of England and the Catholic Church by Henry VIII, who basically facilitated it to marry loads of wives and to get divorced and all of that. So it's actually a bit of a history buff's dream. We know that uniting the church has been one of King Charles's main goals as monarch, because he is the head of the Church of England, and it will sort of bridge the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church in a way that we've never seen before. This is the first time it's ever happened, and I suspect the Pope's ongoing illness is probably an opportune moment to try and get this through, to signal to the world that actually King Charles is serious about uniting the church, and at least showing the sort of friendly connection between the two, which historically has always been strained because of history. So it will be quite interesting to see. Obviously, this is subject to the Pope's health, and whether he is actually fit to receive the royals in this way. But it will be interesting to see, and it's definitely a moment for the history books.